This is Generations Kevin Swanson with you, and I have a question. So Michigan's religious landscape includes 61% Christians, 2% Muslims, and yet Michigan voted for a Muslim communist in yesterday's primary election for the U.S. Senate seat. Michigan has had nothing but Democrat senators for 20 years, so meet your new senator, a communist Muslim named Abdul something or other. Can you say Abdul? Can you say Allah Akbar? How about that? Allah Akbar. Can you say that? If you're in Michigan, learn it. Get it down. Allah Akbar. And now New York City also, 57% Christian, 37% Catholic, 16% Jewish, and 8.5% Muslim, yet they vote for a Muslim communist as mayor. Simple question for you. Why? Why the Muslim communist? Now, remember, Muslims step in to fill the void when Christianity rots out. Since the 5th and 6th centuries, the Christian church in Europe and anywhere in the world faces the problem of rotting out. This has been an issue. And God in his providence raises up flocks of locusts to pressure these areas of the world where the faith rots out. So now, do you know what locusts do? Now, they don't usually plant gardens. At least, we haven't seen that. So now here's the standard line from the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 28. If you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow his commands and decrees I'm giving you today, all these curses will come on you and overtake you. You shall carry much seed out to the field, but gather little in, for the locust shall consume it. Locusts, consuming all your trees and the produce of your land. Okay, so that's Deuteronomy 28. Now think of the Byzantium. Eastern Christianity was pretty much rotted out by the 13th century. They lasted about 1,000 years. That's not bad. But they were rotted out by the 13th century, and the Muslims took over Turkey. The Roman Empire pretty much rotted out North Africa. Not as if Christianity made much of an inroads there, but the Roman Empire had rotted it out pretty good, and the Muslims took over in the 8th century. Europe has pretty much rotted out now, and the Muslims are taking over Europe. And New York and Michigan's Christianity is pretty much rotted out. So now the Muslims are taking over. Now, the Muslim worldview gets an F- for improving economies. They turn themselves into the warfare state, the oppressive state, the state built on a few fiefdoms, the state built upon coerced submission. The word Islam means peace by forced submission. So we will forcibly submit you to submission, and you will be at peace. You hear me? So where are we headed? Muslims heading up Scotland, New York, and soon Michigan as well. Given the abandonment of the Christian faith in Scotland, Canada, America, elsewhere, assuming there will be no revival and no reformation of the Christian faith, okay, that's worst case scenario. I get it. But where are we headed? That's my question today. North Africa, Saudi Arabia, communist Muslim rulers. What's it going to look like? Now, keep in mind the 2025 Corruptions Perception Index lists the most corrupt nations on earth. I refer to the CPI from Transparency International, my book Epoch, and other parts of our generation's curriculum. So we always come back to this. Our students should know this very well. 8 out of the top 10 most corrupt nations in the world where you don't want to do business. All right? They take the 200 nations, and it turns out 8 out of the top 10 most corrupt nations in the world are Muslim nations. 2 are communist. By their fruits ye shall know them. It's a good statement. Comes from Jesus. So free enterprise doesn't have the slightest chance of survival in Muslim countries. It's interesting. I was reviewing the Saudi Arabia economy, and here is a quote I found online. A bewildering combination of a feudal fealty system and more modern political patronages at every level and every sphere of activity, Saudis maneuver through life manipulating individual privileges, favors, obligations, and connections. By the same token, the government bureaucracy is a maze of overlapping and conflicting power centers. There's just no way to build an economy. There's no way. No way. Muslims' ethics are also corrupted to the very core. When Christian countries rot out, Muslims rush in to build their fiefdoms to build on corruption, greed, and top-down patronage. By the way, taqiyya. Everybody understand taqiyya? Taqiyya is part of the Muslim theology, and the word is deception. And deception is hardwired into their religion. They will also lie about the doctrine of taqiyya itself, the doctrine which allows deception with unbelievers in trade and treaties, all for the purposes of conquest. So don't ask a Muslim about taqiyya. They will lie as they describe taqiyya to you because they have an obligation to deceive the unbeliever for their economic and military conquest. All right, let's look at the Freedom Index from Heritage Foundation. And again, Heritage Foundation and the Freedom Index, they look at the 200 countries in the world and they identify which countries are better on, I think it's 15 indexes related to freedom, political, economic freedoms and such. Okay, of the 12 least free nations on earth, all right, we're going to go down to the bottom of the list. Of the 12 least free nations on earth today, 4 are communist, 5 are Muslim, and 3 are Roman Catholic. Okay, that's what these worldviews produce. All right, that's the Muslim, communist, Roman Catholic worldview. The bankruptcy of communism has been proven a long time ago, so we don't have to discuss that much. To some extent, even Russia and China have abandoned communism, but not so Michigan. Not so Michigan voters. Not so much New York City. Okay, they haven't figured it out yet. The worst countries in the hemisphere for economy, and everybody knows this already. I mean, everybody who's semi-conscious already knows this. Worst economies in the hemisphere is Cuba. That's number 1. Venezuela and Nicaragua, okay? They're all communist countries. The 3 communist countries in the Western Hemisphere are communist countries, and they are the lowest, the worst in economy. Cuba is on the verge of collapse. The nation's GDP slipped another 5% last year. According to UN's Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, communist Cuba has the worst GDP per capita in Latin America, barely reaching $1,000 per year. That's not per month, that's per year. $1,000. Okay, guys in Michigan voters, $1,000 a year, like $90 a month. It's kind of hard to get by on that. That'll be fun. Check that out. Let's bring communism into Michigan. Yeah, that'll be fun. The worst economies in Latin America are communist Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. Get ready for Christian persecution as well. Under Sharia law, sharing the gospel, criticizing Islam, or leaving Islam is a crime with penalties including death. In Dearborn, Michigan, Shades of Sharia appeared in 2011, years before its Islamic takeover, when police arrested 4 Christian guys, including former Muslim Nabil Qureshi. They were out sharing the gospel on the streets of Dearborn. They were arrested for that. Okay, so the worst hellholes on earth are Muslim communist hellholes intended to bring the people into subservience, total slavery, impoverishment, untold misery, tyranny, and a life of constant fear under wicked tyrants. There's something to look forward to. That's the agenda of the Democrat Party. It's the vision of Michigan voters and New York City voters. That's what they're going for. But here's my question. Why? Why do they embrace such a horrible dystopian vision for the future? Why are they doing this? Why do non-Muslims rush out to vote for Muslim communists who wish to turn a nation into a hellhole? This is a bit of a conundrum. I believe it speaks to a psychological and spiritual condition of the heart. So a couple of things. First, a simple explanation. Here's my simple explanation. The reason they do this is they hate Trump. And Trump doesn't like Muslim and communist ideologies, although he doesn't seem to be all that interested in reducing the scope of socialist government in America. But the left is very upset with the right now. And this could be a temper tantrum. It could be a temper tantrum, a revolt against Trump. They're going to go for everything that Trump doesn't like. Okay, that's my first explanation. But more to the core of it, Michigan and New York hate God. They're in apostasy. The Dutch and the Germans settled these areas, and the Dutch and the Germans have been somewhat the leaders in terms of apostasy in the Western world. The Dutch Reformed, the German Lutherans. I go back to the 19th century on this. All right, it's all very sad. The Bible says this, all them that hate me love death. This hatred of Jesus, this hatred of God and his wisdom will always lead to the embracing of all that leads to death. The leftists, the ex-Christians who hate God will grasp at anything to tear out America's Christian foundations, even to the point of voting for Muslims. Now, it's interesting. Islam provides its own ham-fisted approach to feminism. Have you ever watched the movie Not Without My Daughter? We just watched that like 2 months ago. Okay, so this is the other ditch. The Democrat Party is big on homosexuality and feminism, but now they're voting for Muslim communists. We'll see how that works out for them. But the point is, this is self-destruction. It's about self-immolation. The Republicans, the Democrats, the public schools, the universities, left-wing dominated media, Hollywood, even the churches have lit the charges, and they've been dynamiting the Christian foundations of this country for over a century now. People need to understand it takes a lot of concrete to build back a foundation. And generations have been attempting to build back foundations in the field of education, ultimately by bringing the fear of God and a biblical worldview back into our curriculum. But here's the deal. We only service about probably 15,000 children in America. That's only 0.025% of the nation's children. It's not very much concrete. It's just a start. There are a few other small curriculum suppliers like us out there, but just a few wheelbarrows of concrete trying to get some foundations back in. We're going to need at least 200 times that concrete to make a difference, even a slight difference for the future of the nation. So really, I think the answer is to build back foundations. I mean, it's hard when they've been dynamiting them for 100 years, but you still need to go get concrete and build it back. I don't see there to be a shortcut here, but let's not forget the promise of 2 Chronicles 7. And most people don't back up to the previous verse. So let me do that. When the locusts come upon the land. Can you believe it? When the locusts come. Have the locusts come here? Yes, the locusts are here. They've made it to Europe and they're crawling into Michigan. When the locusts come upon the land, when I shut up the heavens so that there is no rain, or command locusts to devour the land, or send a plague upon my people, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven. I will forgive their sin, will heal their land. Europe is dealing with locusts and droughts. We've been covering that on the worldview. They're dealing with locusts, like lots of locusts have come into Europe, but they've got droughts as well. So it sounds to me like 2 Chronicles 7 still applies to Europe. Well, today, Bill Jack is with me in studio. Communist Muslims. Are all Muslims communists? What's this going to look like for our country?
Kevin, you've already mentioned that there is this rule that Muslims are obligated to deceive unbelievers.
Well, yes,
right?
That's all part of it.
Okay, so when you say a communist Muslim or a Muslim communist, that's an oxymoron.
It sounds that way, doesn't it?
It is an oxymoron because the Muslims' first priority is to spread Islam.
Yes.
And they're not communists.
Right.
They will partner with communists in order to get their goal, which is world domination, just as they did during World War II. They were part of the Axis. They were supporters of Hitler. Oh. Now that seems odd, does it not? But when you look at it, fascism, communism, both end up in totalitarianism.
And so they're all totalitarians, ultimately, because we're looking at strong-armed governments.
It's worse than that. It's worse than that.
Yeah.
This is a belief system that we can bring about a utopia.
By the state. By imposing
and
top down.
That's why the Muslim is wanting to implement Sharia law, because it is a state religion. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so there is no room for dissension. There's no room for questioning. There's no room for any kind of dissent at all. And so it is a totalitarian system, and it's from the outside in, whereas Christianity works from the inside out. We transform the individual, who then has influence on his sphere, his family, his business, his community, and he becomes salt and light. Whereas with any other system, it is an external imposition of rules. If we can just pass enough rules, if we can just pass enough laws, if you can do this checklist, then we will create a perfect society. That's what Marxism is. That's what fascism is. That's what Islam is. Any other worldview devalues the individual, values the group over the individual and ends up with statism over freedom.
It is interesting. The data bears that out. The Heritage Foundation data, you notice the worst nations on earth is about 50-50. 50% of the worst nations on earth are communists. 50% are Muslim, meaning that they both present a form of government that abridged the freedoms of the people. And so if you had a choice between living in communist China or living in Iran, let's say, you have a choice between one or the other, you're going to move your family there. Okay, so we're going to pack up, we're going to move to communist China, we're going to move to Iran. As Christians, I think we would say they're equally bad because they're going to persecute us, whatever the case.
We would call that the horns of a dilemma.
We would be
if
persecuted
one doesn't
either
get
way.
you, the other one does.
But let's say that you're not a Christian. You're just wanting to build a business. You're just wanting to live a good life.
You would assume
which
that you would
country would you choose? I guess that's my question. Which would you choose?
I think a lot of people would gravitate towards Iran.
Why?
Because they think there's stability. Years ago, there was a film, a biopic on Malcolm X. Okay, Malcolm X was head of the nation, or worked for the Nation of Islam at the time. He'd converted to a form of Islam. Now, the Nation of Islam is uniquely American.
I think communists as well. They're pretty much
they're uniquely black and uniquely American. And it's Islam. It's
but
not
they're
Marxism.
Islamic. Okay, so it's more Islamic than communist. Okay.
And Malcolm X, became a figure during the 60s. And he was assassinated by his own people, by those who, there was an internal conflict.
Which, by the way, Muslims have done that for a long time.
Yes.
Since roughly 600 AD, there's been a fair amount. In fact, I've been surprised in this present war that there's conflict between the Muslim nations.
Right,
I guess I wasn't aware of that.
There are
but
denominations of Islam.
Yeah, and
they fight like cats and dogs. It's like the Sadducees and the Pharisees.
Not as bad as the Presbyterians and Baptists in America. So they actually get like hand grenades and things like that in their church splits.
Right.
Okay.
So I went to see this film, and I'm doing a review for. I worked for the Caleb campaign at the time, and I was doing a review for our newspaper that we produced, and so I had a light on the clipboard. It was a matinee, so I knew I wasn't disturbing anybody. There was just a few people, and afterwards, a black woman came over and she asked me what I was doing, and I told her, and she said, "Well, I was part of the Nation of Islam." I said, "Well, I have a question for you. Okay, why?" Okay, what drew you to that? Because it's obviously oppressive of women. Okay,
sure.
It is anti-feminist. It is anti-women's liberation.
On the front of the brochure.
Yes,
that's on the front of the brochure.
Right. And she said,
"The hijab. You get the hijab thing going."
Yeah. She said, "Oh, you don't understand." She said, because of government policies, basically, the black family had been destroyed. And so you have these single women with children. And what the Nation of Islam did is it brought stability. It brought order. It told the men they should take care of their families.
And if they don't, they'll take them out back and beat them to death. That kind of thing, right?
No,
they're pretty structured on this. They're
very structured. They're very family-oriented in that sense. And so she said this, women are willing to give up their liberty for security. That sums up everything that we're talking about here when you have Dearborn, Michigan under Sharia law, is because there is a sense of security. It's an external security. There is no internal peace. As you pointed out, Islam means submission, okay?
Right.
And it's you will submit.
Oh, absolutely.
You will submit.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
It's either you will submit voluntarily,
effectively submit or die.
You will be forced to submit. Okay? So the individual is devalued. Okay? There is this facade of family orientation, as you see, for example, in Mormonism. There's this facade of they're family friendly.
And you see that in Not Without My Child. Have you seen the movie? Did you see the movie starring
Sally Field?
Sally Field, right. And there's a strong family ethic going on, and that was about
so strong, strong. Here's the problem: that it's patriarchal to the point where the father can kill his children if they disobey. Okay,
right.
So there's this weird concept of jurisdiction. Okay, whereas we understand, according to Scripture, the state has jurisdiction, the church has jurisdiction, the family has jurisdiction, but they're limited. They're limited. Only one person has all authority, and that is Jesus Christ. And he delegates authority to these various jurisdictions. But in Islam, it is that if you don't submit to Allah, then you will die if you don't submit. You will be forced to submit, or you might even die. And that takes place in families. Families are extremely, extremely patriarchal to the point where it is an iron fist. Just as Marxism, socialism is the iron fist in a velvet glove. Marxism, they just take off the glove. Okay?
You know, it is interesting that that the Christian faith and Christian law system produces the maximum liberty. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And yet, you know, you've got these other worldviews, the communist, socialist, Marxist, Muslim worldviews that emphasize the state and centralize power and effectively increase tyranny and minimize the liberty that would be provided by Christian law. There's anarchy on the other side. Anarchy where there's, no government, no control, nothing. Although I'm not sure that anarchy has ever survived anywhere in the world. But
it always leads to tyranny.
Yeah.
Or it leads to revival. It either leads to revival or revolution.
Or tyranny. Yeah. Revolution, which eventually yields more tyranny on the other side of it. And yet, we know that we're not going to get maximum liberty under God's law unless there's reformation, unless there's the regeneration of heart. And we can't do that top down. So there's no way that we can impose Christian systems of liberty unless first there's been reformation and regeneration in the hearts of the people. In other words, we're always back to the gospel, checkmate, right?
Right.
We have got to bring the gospel in, and unless there are real conversions, real Christian conversions, unless the Christian gospel is getting out there, unless we're discipling the nations, unless ultimately there's a self-government about it, then we're going to see this tyranny inevitably rise, and we're moving more and more towards totalitarian governments via Muslims and Marxist worldviews. And as our founders would say, either you be governed by God or by God you'll be governed. In other words, either be self-governed or God will open it up such that you will be tyrannized, and you will experience such status form of tyranny. It'd be like 1984, unless there's self-government. But the only way self-government can come
humbling before God,
by humility, by regeneration, and
that's why that verse is so important. Unless
the 2 Chronicles 7,
my people. Now it doesn't say unless those people, unless my people. Now who would that be? It would start with the church. It would start with Christians. We need to be on our faces and praying for forgiveness for our lack of responsibility, our irresponsible actions that have allowed the culture to slip this far. And then the church needs to stand up and begin to proclaim truth and grace. And then you will see revival. And leads into a reformation, and that's what we desire. We're facing an upcoming election cycle, and everybody's just all excited and all a Twitter because we have these avowed Marxists
and Muslims
running for key positions in various states here in Colorado and in Michigan and elsewhere, and we're saying, what happened here? It's because we have forgotten God.
Mm-hmm.
It is not. You would point the finger at the church. Have forgotten what the founders.
You would still.
The founders understood this and rooted and grounded everything on God's word. Even though they weren't all Christians, they thought more Christian than most Christians do today. And until we go back and we root and ground our system of government and our laws into God's word, then we're doomed. It's the Mayflower Compact. We need to go back and say, okay, we've got to decide whose God is God.
2%, Bill. Muslims in Michigan only make up 2% of the population, and yet somehow a Muslim is elected by a ton of non-Muslims.
Why should that surprise you? In any organization, Kevin, okay, 1% lead, 4% do the work of the leadership, the other 95% merely follow.
And what you're saying is that we don't have
civic organization,
and that's what you're saying.
Or church, or government. 1% of any group. It could be a plumbers association. It could be a charitable organization. 1% of the membership lead. 4% do the work of the leadership. The other 95% merely go along.
But where are the Christians? You're saying there are not 2% committed, self-consciously, self-consistently, epistemologically self-conscious Christians in the state of Michigan today. Probably more Muslims than Christians.
Right.
When it comes to committed Christians, probably very few committed Christians left in the state of Michigan.
Because we're playing nice. And by that, I mean, we're ignorant of what's going on around us. And we try to be so pleasant that we try to win people to Jesus by being nice. Okay? Jesus was not a nice guy.
He spoke the truth.
He was truthful and he was loving, but he wasn't ignorant of what went on in the culture, nor was he so pleasant that he failed to confront people with the truth. Christians have failed. And so we need boldness by Christians. And I don't mean we have to be rude and crude. I'm not talking about imposing our version of Sharia law in the country, but I'm talking about providing laws that provide liberty. Because of Christianity, we had a culture, we have a nation that has provided the greatest prosperity, security, liberty, and opportunity than any other nation in the history of the world. It's because Christianity so permeated the culture that even non-Christians thought and acted as Christian as possible. Doesn't mean they were all Christians, but it so salted and lit the culture that liberty abounded. That's why on the Liberty Bell is Leviticus, where
right.
We need
Spirit
to proclaim liberty throughout the land.
Yeah. Now,
we need to be walking Liberty Bells.
America has Christian foundations. We've been jettisoning those foundations for a long time. Lots of dynamite thus far. And I think there's a degree to which we do retain our Christian foundations, our Christian worldview, by opposing those who want to come into the country and destroy that. Now, it turns out, my view is that the people that have destroyed the foundation of this nation were not Muslim immigrants for the most part. It was the John Deweys of the world.
Right.
It was the apostates. And you can get my book, Apostate, The Men Who Destroyed the Christian West, if you want to better understand how we got to where we are today. It was the apostate presidents. It was the apostate education departments. It was the apostate John Dewey. It was the apostate atheistic, naturalistic, materialistic worldview that was brought in by the U.S. Supreme Court in the 1950s, 1960s that destroyed this nation's foundations more than anything else. And yet, it's interesting that these apostates that run this country also want to bring these Muslims in. Now, I've said from the beginning that I believe there's points at which the Immigration Naturalization Service needs to hold back on the Islamic hordes in the sense that somebody walks into the INS office, I want to come into America, and he's got the Quran in one hand and kill the infidel tattooed in the other hand. I think there's a point at which we do draw lines. This nation is a Christian nation. This nation is going to prevent those who come in with a radically different worldview with the intention to destroy this nation. If that be the case, the INS needs to send them back to Saudi. Now, how in the world did the Muslim population make it to Michigan? And this goes back to the 1920s. Guy by the name of Henry Ford up in Dearborn.
He was an
anti-Semite.
anti-Semite.
Gets this thing going.
He was an anti-Semite. And so he courted Arabs.
Hundreds of thousands,
yes.
Turns out. These were the auto workers. Apparently, he was trying to circumvent the control of the labor unions, but you say it was more than that.
Yes. And as a result, they now control Dearborn. Now, there were Christian Arabs, there were Muslim Arabs, but the
majority
were were supporting Islam. And oddly enough, his son married a Jewess, and so his grandchildren are Jewish.
He had to backstep on that one a bit.
He had to, it's amazing what happens when you have grandchildren.
Yeah, you've got a few yourself.
Yeah.
In 1949, the Islamic Center of America, now the largest mosque in North America, was founded in Dearborn by an imam by the name of Mohammed Shiri. Also, Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson passed legislation that would change America forever, dramatically increasing the country's Muslim population. I'm quoting from an article from Joshua Bontrager. The Immigration Nationality Act of 1965 opened the floodgates to Middle Eastern and Asian Muslim countries. And so there was this, roll out the red carpet, bring the other religion in because, Lyndon B. Johnson is no Christian. He knows it.
What happened?
So he's going to be bringing these
60s?
guys in. That's all part of this revolution.
But what happened during the 60s? What was banned? Prayer, devotional prayer,
the
and
Bible God,
reading,
etc. Right? Mm-hmm.
From the public schools
at the very same time.
At the very same time.
You're right. And don't forget, after 9/11, America elected the most Muslim, or at least pro-Muslim president in America's history. After 9/11, it made perfect sense. The Muslims come in, kill our people. Let's elect somebody who believes in the Islamic religion.
Yes.
Great idea. This is what Americans like to do best. Barack Obama invited 1.1 million Muslims into the country during his administration. Half of the total refugee population that came into America during the Obama administration, half of them, came from Muslim majority nations. And Muslim majority nations make up 20% of the population of the world. So was there a bias here? Absolutely. There's a bias towards bringing the Muslims into this country so that they would run for U.S. Senate and for mayor of New York City. So that is the rest of the story. But again, we're not just saying it's Muslim immigration. What we're saying is that it is the fact that we have been dynamiting the foundations of this country for way too long.
It is an internal rot. And then what happens is there's no defense against the locusts coming in and devouring your fields because there's no defense set up by a worldview that is any different than theirs. A biblical worldview will defend against that, against Islam, against secularism, against Marxism, against socialism. But once you drop those barriers, you think you're going to remain neutral. There is no neutrality. And so the nation that hates God loves death. And all of these other worldviews depend upon death, mass destruction of individuals in order to create a utopian world.
We are doing the best we can to be those that understand the times today, men of Issachar. We want to understand the times so we will know what to do. Would recommend to you my book, Under God. Could you grab a copy of that book right there? Under God, just released. This is on the subject of immigration, the foundations of this country, how to restore the foundations of this country, a battle plan for reforming civil government, every nation under God with liberty and justice for all, under God's law. Get a copy of Under God at our website, generations.org. This is Kevin Swanson and Bill Jack inviting you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation. This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.